The stage had been set for what many thought would be a routine televised panel, one of those events where big political figures trade words and opinions, but nothing truly groundbreaking ever happens. Yet the presence of both Barack Obama and Donald Trump in the same space immediately shifted the stakes. It wasn't just two men sitting across from each other. It was two legacies colliding, two approaches to leadership being silently measured by the millions of viewers watching at home. From the moment Trump walked onto the stage, his demeanor carried the familiar bravado that had become his trademark. He was confident, smirking, and clearly ready to dominate the conversation. He thrived on confrontation, and having Obama seated just a few feet away was an opportunity too tempting for him to pass up. As the evening unfolded, the moderator directed the conversation toward the topic of leadership, legacy, and the responsibilities of running a nation in turbulent times. Obama, as usual, was measured in tone. He leaned back slightly, his hands folded, speaking with the calm cadence that had defined his years in office. He spoke about policy in a way that was steady, layered with facts and laced with a quiet authority. The audience listened intently as they always did with him. Trump, however, sat restless, waiting for his turn to strike. His body language gave away his impatience, tapping fingers, shifting in his chair, glancing at the cameras more than the moderator. The opening he had been waiting for finally came when the moderator asked about how each man saw their contribution to the country's progress. Obama outlined his vision, highlighting the challenges he had faced and the efforts his administration had made to stabilize the nation during a difficult period. He wasn't boastful, but rather reflective, choosing his words carefully. And that's when Trump pounced. With a smirk and a sharp turn of his head toward Obama, Trump leaned into his microphone and delivered a line designed to cut deep. He dismissed Obama's entire presidency as nothing more than all talk, no results. He said it with confidence, his tone dripping with mockery, making sure the cameras caught the disdain on his face. The words hung in the air like a taunt. The audience reacted with a low murmur, and you could almost feel the tension rise as all eyes shifted to Obama, waiting for his response. It was classic Trump, bold, direct, and dismissive. He had built a reputation on turning debates and interviews into battles of sound bites, moments where he could throw out a line that would dominate headlines. This was no different. He believed he had cornered Obama, reducing his years in office to a single dismissive phrase. For Trump, it wasn't just about scoring a point. It was about belittling someone who had always represented a contrast to his own style of leadership. He wanted to rattle Obama, to push him into defending himself, maybe even into losing that calm composure. But instead of rushing into a defense, Obama simply sat still. His face didn't change, his posture didn't shift, and he didn't interrupt. He let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle the room. Viewers at home could sense it too. This wasn't a moment where he would fall into Trump's trap. It was the setup to something sharper, something quieter, and something far more cutting than a back-and-forth shouting match. The genius of that setup was in the contrast. Trump had made his move with volume and aggression, assuming that louder and bolder would always win. Obama, however, was preparing to show that real power sometimes lies in patience. By allowing Trump to have the moment first, to deliver his jab in full view of the nation, Obama ensured that whatever came next would be twice as effective. The stage was no longer just about answering a question. It had become a test of composure, intelligence, and timing. Every camera in the room focused on Obama. The moderator paused, waiting, sensing the weight of what was coming. And the audience leaned in, the anticipation thick in the air. Trump had taken his shot with a dismissive remark, and now the entire room waited to see if Obama would stumble into defensiveness or rise with something unexpected. It was in that quiet space between Trump's mockery and Obama's response where the setup reached its peak. The power of that moment was that Trump believed he had seized control, but in reality, the stage had just shifted. The audience wasn't thinking about Trump's words anymore. They were waiting to hear Obama's. It was the calm before the storm, the silence before the line that would later dominate every headline. And when Obama finally spoke, the setup that Trump had so confidently orchestrated would become the very trap that undid him. When the moment came, it didn't arrive with fireworks or raised voices. It wasn't dramatic hand gestures or a shouting match that carried it. Instead, Barack Obama leaned slightly toward his microphone, his face calm and collected, his voice steady enough to make the audience lean in closer. He looked directly at Donald Trump, not with anger, not even with irritation, but with that quiet confidence he had always been known for. Then, without pause or build-up, he delivered the one line that would shut down the entire exchange. "If you're so good at running things, why are you still talking about me more than you talk about your own record?" It was precise, quick, and devastating. The brilliance of the line wasn't only in the words, but in the way Obama framed it. He didn't defend his own record, he didn't list accomplishments, and he didn't engage in a laundry list of rebuttals to Trump's accusations. Instead, he flipped the entire conversation back onto Trump, exposing something deeper, that Trump, even after holding the highest office in the land, couldn't stop measuring himself against Obama. It was as if Obama had held up a mirror on live television and forced Trump to look at himself. The audience reaction was instantaneous. A wave of laughter mixed with gas rippled through the room. Some people clapped, others leaned forward as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Social media, already buzzing with clips of the night, exploded almost immediately. Commentators rushed to get the line transcribed, and hashtags began forming within minutes. For those watching, it wasn't just a clapback. It was the perfect distillation of the tension between the two men, captured in fewer than 20 words. Trump, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. He shifted in his chair, tightened his jaw, and forced a smirk. But the usual quick comeback wasn't there. He tried to interject, but the timing was gone. The cameras weren't on him anymore. They were locked onto Obama, who remained unbothered, leaning back as if he had simply stated a fact of life. For a man like Trump, who thrived on controlling the narrative, it was a rare moment where he found himself cornered by nothing more than a calm sentence. The beauty of Obama's line lay in its simplicity. It didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound like something crafted by a team of writers. It sounded authentic, as though it had been sitting on the tip of his tongue for years, waiting for the exact moment to land. He knew the weight of it. By pointing out Trump's obsession with him, Obama wasn't just responding to an insult. He was making a statement about Trump's entire political identity. It was a surgical strike, not a wild swing. For those who had followed the history between the two men, the sting carried even more weight. Trump had built parts of his political persona around attacking Obama, from the early days of questioning his legitimacy to the constant comparisons he made throughout his presidency. The line hit harder because it wasn't just about that night. It was about years of fixation finally being called out in public. Obama didn't need to say more. He had summarized what millions of people had already observed. In the seconds after the line was delivered, the camera panned across the audience, capturing reactions that told the story without words. Some were laughing outright, others were nodding with approval, and even those who supported Trump were left momentarily stunned. The moderator tried to regain control, but the energy in the room had already shifted. Obama had taken the spotlight, not with a long speech, but with a sentence that no one could forget. Trump eventually attempted to push back, but the rhythm was gone. Whatever he said after seemed more like damage control than dominance. Obama had already defined the moment, and everything else that followed was just noise. The live broadcast ensured that millions of viewers witnessed it in real time. And within hours, the clip was replaying on every news station, dissected by every analyst, and shared endlessly across platforms. The weight of that single line wasn't only in its immediate impact, but in what it revealed. Obama had reminded Trump, and everyone watching, that true strength doesn't always come from being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it comes from timing, from clarity, from delivering a thought so undeniable that it silences everything else. By calling out Trump's fixation with him, Obama showed that leadership isn't about tearing someone down. It's about knowing when to let one sentence do all the talking. And in that moment, Trump, who prided himself on his ability to dominate a stage, found himself reduced to silence, caught in the shadow of a line that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The aftermath of Barack Obama's single line was felt instantly, not just inside the room, but across every medium that thrives on speed: television, social media, and live commentary. The second the words left his mouth, a ripple of energy moved through the audience. Some laughed with genuine surprise. Others clapped their hands as if they had just witnessed a master class, and a few leaned back in their seats in disbelief. It was a live television moment that no scriptwriter could have crafted better. The cameras captured Donald Trump's face in the immediate aftermath, and the image told its own story. A tight jaw, narrowed eyes, and an expression that wavered between defiance and discomfort. He tried to smirk it off, but the blow had landed too cleanly for it to be ignored. The networks knew instantly they had just been handed gold. Producers in the control rooms were already cueing the replay, commentators were scribbling notes, and journalists were crafting tweets before the applause even died down. Within minutes, clips of Obama's lines started to flood timelines, spreading across platforms at lightning speed. By the time the broadcast had even finished, the phrase had been turned into GIFs, memes, and trending hashtags. For viewers at home, it wasn't just entertainment. It felt like witnessing history in real time. What made the moment so powerful was that it wasn't an extended debate. It wasn't a long, policy-driven back and forth. It was the sheer efficiency of Obama's words. That efficiency translated perfectly into the digital age. A single line, under 20 words, carried the kind of punch that people could share endlessly without losing its meaning. Commentators across the political spectrum jumped on it. Some praised Obama for delivering a sharp reminder of Trump's fixation on him, while even those who usually leaned toward Trump couldn't deny that the line had landed harder than expected. Trump, for his part, attempted to recover. He tried to fire back, to spin the moment into one of his usual performances where he could turn mockery into momentum, but every attempt sounded more like an explanation than a comeback. The timing was gone. The problem with live television is that once the moment passes, there is no way to rewind and reclaim it. Obama had spoken, the audience had reacted, and the headlines were already writing themselves. The balance of control had shifted in a matter of seconds. For Obama, this wasn't unfamiliar territory. Throughout his career, he had demonstrated a knack for using humor and timing to disarm critics. But this moment carried more weight because of who sat across from him. Trump was a master of dominating airwaves, of turning conversations into arenas where he dictated the tone. Yet here, in front of millions, he found himself on the receiving end of a sentence so cleanly delivered that it erased whatever momentum he thought he had built. It was not only a sharp reply, it was a reminder of why Obama remained a figure who could still command a room, even years after leaving office. The impact lingered beyond the event itself. Morning shows replayed the clip with different panels dissecting its meaning. Late-night comedians turned it into their opening monologues. Political commentators called it the highlight of the evening, and some even labeled it the definitive exchange between the two men. The viral nature of the line turned it into more than just a clapback. It became a cultural reference point. Whenever the subject of Trump and Obama's rivalry came up afterward, that sentence was repeated as shorthand for the power dynamic on display that night. There was also a deeper sting to it for Trump, because it wasn't just a witty jab. It exposed a truth that had been quietly observed for years. Obama's words pointed directly at the reality that Trump had never stopped framing his own political image in contrast to him. Even while holding office, Trump often seemed more concerned with undoing Obama's legacy or proving himself against the shadow of his predecessor than focusing on his own record. By putting that obsession into words, Obama didn't just silence Trump for the night. He reminded everyone watching of a larger pattern. The viral reaction amplified that reminder. The internet thrives on moments that cut through noise, and Obama's line was perfectly suited for it. Screenshots of Trump's expression, side by side with Obama's calm delivery, flooded feeds. Even people who hadn't watched the live broadcast were soon aware of what had happened, because the clip was everywhere. For days, the coverage overshadowed other stories. The discussion wasn't about policy or the event itself. It was about how Obama had shut Trump down with one line. And that's where the true impact of the moment lay. It wasn't just about scoring a point in a debate. It was about shaping the narrative that followed. Obama's sentence became the headline, the talking point, the soundbite. What stood out most about that night wasn't simply that Barack Obama had the sharper line, but the way it showed the difference between two completely different approaches to leadership. Donald Trump came in, as he always did, with the expectation that force, volume, and boldness would carry the stage. He relied on throwing verbal punches, on keeping opponents off balance, on never giving an inch. It had worked for him in rallies, in interviews, and even in political debates where sheer intensity often overshadowed substance. But when Obama leaned in and delivered his calm, cutting line, it became clear that power doesn't always belong to the loudest voice. Sometimes it belongs to the one who knows when and how to say just enough. That single moment revealed why Obama had built such a reputation as a communicator. He didn't need to drown out Trump, didn't need to engage in a shouting match, and didn't even need to list a long defense of his record. Instead, he framed the conversation around Trump's own behavior, exposing something everyone watching could see but few had put into words: the constant fixation Trump carried with him. It wasn't just about the night's insult, it was about a larger truth. Obama showed that restraint, patience, and precision could dismantle bluster more effectively than anger ever could. The takeaway for many viewers was profound. Here were two men who had both occupied the Oval Office, each with very different styles. Trump embodied confrontation, always ready with a jab, a nickname, or a dismissive phrase. Obama embodied composure, preferring clarity and timing to make his point. When the two styles collided, the contrast became undeniable. It wasn't that one man spoke and the other stayed silent. It was that one man spoke endlessly, while the other waited for the exact moment to drop a sentence that cut deeper than an entire speech. For Trump, this was particularly jarring because he thrived on controlling narratives. He knew the power of repetition, of dominating headlines, of ensuring his voice was always the one people heard. Yet on that night, Obama reminded him that a single, well-placed comment could undo hours of bluster. Trump tried to recover, but the damage had been done. Every attempt he made to push back sounded weaker, more desperate, because the audience had already decided where their focus was. The sharpest line had been spoken, and it hadn't come from him. The broader impact of the exchange extended beyond just entertainment value. Commentators and analysts pointed out that the moment carried a lesson about politics itself. It showed that leadership isn't measured by who can shout the loudest or who can dominate airtime. It's measured by who can reveal truth with clarity. Obama didn't just silence Trump. He reminded the country that sometimes the most effective power is quiet, deliberate, and undeniable. That truth resonated because people had seen years of Trump's approach, and here was a counterexample that worked just as effectively, if not more. Even among those who weren't Obama supporters, the respect for the delivery was noticeable. Political opponents acknowledged that the line was sharp, well-timed, and impossible to refute. It was the kind of remark that didn't need spin because it spoke for itself, and that was what gave it staying power. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a piece of commentary that stood on its own. Days later, people weren't quoting policy details from the event. They were still repeating that single sentence. For those who admired Obama, the moment felt like validation. It was proof that his style, often mocked by Trump as too careful or too intellectual, could still dominate a stage without shouting. For those who followed Trump, it was a reminder that even the strongest stage presence can falter when faced with a calm dismantling. The clash between them symbolized more than just personal rivalry. It symbolized two competing ideas of what leadership looks like. And that night, the calm precision carried more weight than the relentless bravado. In the end, the takeaway was simple yet striking. Obama showed that leadership isn't about overwhelming an opponent with noise. It's about knowing when one sentence can expose everything that needs to be said. Trump had come into the night expecting to control the stage, but he left overshadowed by a line so sharp that it lived far beyond the moment. It was a reminder that sometimes the quietest voice in the room carries the most authority, and that true power doesn't always need to roar, it just needs to strike at the right time. As the dust settled from that unforgettable exchange, what lingered wasn't the noise of the debate, but the clarity of a single moment. Barack Obama hadn't needed to dominate the stage with endless words, nor had he resorted to raising his voice to outshine Donald Trump. Instead, he showed that sometimes one sharp observation can cut through the clutter more effectively than any extended argument. The silence that followed his remark carried more weight than any applause, because it left Trump scrambling for footing while Obama leaned back, calm and unshaken. It was the kind of moment that reminded everyone watching that real influence often comes from timing, presence, and the ability to make words matter. The night became less about policy and more about perception. Millions of people didn't walk away dissecting statistics or debating specific issues. They walked away repeating Obama's line, sharing it online, and talking about it at work the next day. It had become more than just a response. It had become a cultural moment, one that underscored the different ways these two men approached leadership. Trump thrived on intensity, always keeping the conversation alive by force, while Obama thrived on restraint, knowing when to wait and when to strike. And in that room, restraint won. For Trump, the exchange was a reminder of the difficulty of battling someone who doesn't play by the same rules. He was used to opponents who would meet him punch for punch, shout for shout, but Obama didn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, he gave him something worse, a clean, precise truth that stripped away the performance and left him exposed. It wasn't just a jab at Trump's words that night. It was a commentary on his entire approach. The fact that Trump, even after leaving office, continued to frame his political identity in comparison to Obama spoke louder than any defense he could muster. The lasting effect of the moment wasn't simply that Obama had the better line. It was that the line revealed something people had long felt, but perhaps hadn't heard articulated so directly. It reminded viewers that leadership is about more than claiming victories or attacking opponents. It's about the discipline to know when to speak, how to speak, and what message will resonate long after the microphones are turned off. Obama's ability to condense that into a single sentence showed the kind of control that defined his public life and the kind of sharpness that continues to shape his legacy. In the end, the clash wasn't just another headline in the ongoing rivalry between Barack Obama and Donald Trump. It became a lasting example of how words can carry power far beyond the moment they're spoken. One line delivered with calm precision shifted the entire energy of the night, stole the spotlight, and reminded the world why Obama's voice still commands attention. It wasn't loud, it wasn't long, but it was lasting, and in politics,